Okay, so today's practice, we're going to use the wall for the majority of it. And you're going to need a strap, yoga strap. This could also be a necktie, a bathrobe tie, and a hand towel. Okay, you're not going to want to have any socks on your feet because I want the skin of your feet to be able to contact the wall or whatever prop it's interacting with. Alrighty, so we're going to come legs up the wall. Now, the easiest way I know of to get into position is to sit sideways with the side of my hip closest to the wall and then just spin the legs up and lay myself down. And then I might have to wiggle a little bit to get closer. Now, I want you to have an eye towards the fact that I don't care how straight your legs are and I don't care how close your butt is to the wall. I do care about you letting the weight of your pelvis come onto the floor and the weight of your spine being on the floor and back ribs and back of skull. So if you're too close to the wall and there's too much tension through that back line, you'll be kind of hanging off the ground someplace. Typically, I find that in the pelvis. So make sure you're far enough away from the wall, have enough bend in the legs that the weight of the pelvis and the spine and the rib cage and the skull can settle onto the floor. What I want you to kind of notice when you first land here is where your heels contact the wall and the direction your feet point. Okay, and then we're going to have an eye towards that right leg, and you're going to bring your hand onto the right side of your pelvis and a bit of a bend into that right knee potentially. And you're simply going to roll the leg out and in. Now, because we're intending to move the leg, okay, the pelvis ought to be quiet. So what I mean by that is you're not going to feel one side or the other of the pelvis moving towards the armpit or away from the armpit. You're going to feel the weight through the back of the pelvis. It'll change a little bit on this side because as we come from external to internal rotation, you're going to feel more pressure next to the sacrum when you're internally rotated on that right side. And then as you roll out, you'll feel that pressure near the sacrum kind of dissipate because we're not as in on that SI joint. And now I want you to, over the next couple, intend to have the foot lead. So the foot is leading the leg. Okay, now I want you to intend for the knee to lead. Feel how that is different or familiar. Now I want you to intend for further up the thigh to lead. So you're thinking about, if you put a hand on the inside of the thigh and the outside of the hand, on the outside of the thigh, that you're moving into those hands first and that the knee and the foot are following. Okay, and then just both legs up the wall. Just kind of notice how that feels. You might feel like that right side feels more spread across the back body on the floor. Okay, you might feel like that leg is a little more settled into the hip sockets. You're going to go through that same sequence on the other side. So just starting to roll the leg out and in, and just notice what you notice. Notice if the hip comes up towards the armpit and moves away from the armpit in order to roll the leg. Notice if the abdomen is really grippy or you're engaging your abs in order to rotate the leg. And then for the next throw, I want you to intend to lead with the toes and the foot. And again, notice what aspects of familiarity or, what arises as you lead with the foot. And then do a few leading with your knee. And again, notice the elements of your experience of leading with the knee. And then I want you to bring the hand on the inside and the outside of the thigh. And I want you to focus on the skin coming into the outside hand and the skin of the thigh coming into that inside hand, and that the upper femur is what's moving the knee and the foot. And you don't have to go through any pinchy or grippy spots. Notice how smooth the movement is. Notice where you feel maybe there's gaps or areas that you can't feel through that arc of rotation. Again, what the abdominals are doing, what your breath is doing, what your jaw or eyes might be doing. Then let the leg come to stillness. Brilliant. Okay, so now here what I'm going to invite you to do is just cross the right ankle over the left. Okay. Once you do that, then I'm going to get you to externally rotate and slide down that right leg. Now, some of you might notice that in order to externally rotate and slide that leg down, that the knee has to come way kind of out to the side. So I want you to play with the range where that knee kind of is able to rotate over top of the hip. So once the knee kind of falls outside here, then we're not really purely in external rotation, which is we're into some abduction. And I'm really interested in us working, staying more in line with the hip and this external rotation. Okay. Then from here, put your hand at the knee and you're going to rotate the knee, that knee distal end of the femur, into the hand. Watch that you don't kind of collapse at the ankle in order to move the knee. So I want you to think if that foot was on a wall, like the inside and the outside of the ankle position isn't changing as you press this knee into your hand. Again, notice if the pelvis is kind of going away from or towards the armpit, or if you notice the back of the pelvis arching away from the floor or getting heavy into the floor as you rotate the legs. Those will all be signs that you're trying to move through the pelvis and the spine rather than using the musculature that allows rotation of the femur. Okay, then we're going to slide this leg down the wall a little bit. And again, press and release, press and release, press and release. Now I might hold that isometric, and hopefully as you do, you're feeling stuff in and around the outside of that hip working. Now, if you're feeling a lot of pinching in the front of the hip, I would invite you to move away from the wall just to give yourself a little bit more space, and so that you don't have to come to your end range of hip flexion. Because when I'm here, my hip's in quite a bit of hip flexion, and if I don't have the control to bring myself into more hip flexion, I'm going to get pinchy in the front of that hip. So wiggle yourself away from the wall so you're in less hip flexion. Cross the ankle so you can focus on the rotation without coming to the end range of hip flexion here, and then work on the rotation. And then that should take the pinchy quality out of the front of the hip and get you feeling like you're working stuff in and around the top of that leg and on the outside of that hip more. Okay, then I'm going to draw that heel off of the wall, keeping my pelvis on the floor. Thinking about reaching that knee towards the wall, but now I'm bringing myself into some more hip flexion. Then I'm going to bring that left heel towards my right buttock and bring that right foot towards the floor, bringing myself down into a little bit of a twist here. My feet are going to reach the wall, but I'm just going to take a few breaths here, resting my one knee and my one foot on the wall. And then I'm going to bring the legs back up, slide that up the wall and that up the wall, and just notice what I noticed there. So if you did move away from the wall, I'd encourage you to just stay that distance here on this side, because it's likely that you're going to be the same. But if you're curious, you can wiggle yourself close to the wall and always move away when you need to. And you're going to cross that ankle and start to slide it down, focusing on the rotation of the femur. So again, notice if you come into more abduction than rotation, and stay where we've got some rotation happening. So I've got more ability to externally rotate on this side. I'm going to place my hand on the outside of that knee and just think about rotating that leg into my hand. So it could be a thought of reaching this heel towards my fingers and reaching this knee away from my torso. And that's going to activate all of those external rotators in that hip. Okay, so you could think of simultaneously moving the knee and moving the foot. And then again, watching that you're not changing your ankle position by way of rotating the knee, but letting the ankle kind of collapse. Keep that same distance. Press and press. Notice again if the hip moves away from your armpit or towards it. Now I'm going to slide that leg down the wall. Think about reaching the back of this thigh and knee towards the wall and drawing the other leg towards me. So they're going to oppose one another in their directions. Feeling a lot of good kind of loading in the outside of that hip. And then again, I'm going to bring this right heel towards my left buttock and this left foot towards the floor, bringing me into a bit of a twist. Again, you'll get more twist the further you are from the wall. And then I'm going to lift out of it, unwind, and bring those legs to the wall. Just notice what I notice here. So now that we've wiggled a little ways away from the wall, we're actually going to come a bit further so that I can be at 90 degrees at my knees and at my hips. Okay. And then I'm going to take my towel and it's going to come underneath my feet. And I want to start with my feet kind of wide so that when I bring them back in line with my knees, there's some gather in the towel, some gather in the middle of the towel. And I want to make sure that my forefoot, when I wiggled away, I started to choke myself. I want to make sure that my forefoot and my heel are on that towel. First thing I'm going to think about doing is connecting through the mound of my big toe, and then imagine stretching wide out to that pinky side of the foot. So stretching that longitudinal arch of our foot, okay? A lot of us wear shoes that are too narrow, and we start to lose the extensibility of that longitudinal arch, and it stays kind of in this contracted position. So we want to make sure we kind of stretch from the big toe mound up to the pinky, let the heel be a little heavy and hang towards the floor, and then connect the heel. So we're long through that lateral arch of the foot, pinky toe mound to the heel, and that medial arch of the foot, big toe mound to the heel. Okay, and then from here, what we're going to play with is simply sliding the heels wide and back in. Okay, and then you're going to think about sliding the forefoot wide and in, but keeping that longitudinal arch long. So as you push the big toe mound out to the pinky toe mound, you want to make sure that you're not losing that width through the arch and kind of lifting. And just notice how much your foot, your ankle, your shin, and possibly your thighs move. Because I could move that foot by way of also moving my knees and my hips. Okay, so just notice which way you naturally do it, and then see if you can isolate or expand it. So I'm able to isolate it, keep it in the foot, and that feels very different muscularly. Then if I expand it and I let the knees and the legs follow that direction intended by my foot, okay? And again, do the heel. Notice what it is to isolate it, and then what it is to let the whole leg follow that intention of direction that comes from the heel. And we'd like to be able to both isolate and integrate and move the rest of us from that intention. It just gives us a lot more movement choice. Okay, so from here we're going to let that towel go and just place the feet on the wall. Okay, feeling the pelvis on the floor. And we're going to move into some pelvic clocks. So you're going to let the tailbone get heavy and reach towards the floor. And then we're going to call that 6 o'clock if we're laying on a clock face, okay? And then as I imagine kind of pressing the feet gently into the wall and I send the top back of my pelvis to the floor, that would be at the 12 o'clock on my clock, and the tailbone lifts away from the 6. So we're just going to move between those two. So I might think of sliding my heels, kind of pulling them down the wall without actually pulling them. Feel how that sends my pelvis to 6. And as I intend and just press the feet into the wall or think about kicking the feet up the wall, how that sends me to 12. So I'm going to use this interaction of my feet on the wall to move my pelvis between 6 and 12 o'clock. I'm also going to notice how the rest of my spine and my head respond to that movement of my pelvis. Some of us might notice, oh wow, I really wanted to use like my abdominals to be what is moving the pelvis, and how it maybe feels different to have the legs. Okay, and then we're going to come to stillness. Now, my right leg is above the 9 on my clock, and my left leg is above the 3 on my clock. So I'm going to send my pelvis into the 3 by way of reaching my right knee towards the ceiling. Okay, and you see how that sends your left side of your pelvis into the 3. Then I'm going to think about reaching my left knee to the ceiling and see how that sends the right side of my pelvis to the 9. So I'm going to let the pelvis go between the 9 and the 3. And then I might start to be able to have the knees get quieter and still have that pelvis rock side to side. The next time it goes to the 3, then I'm going to play with going from 3 to 2 to 1 to 12. And then from 12 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. From 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 12. From 12 to 11, 10, 9. 9 to 10, 11, 12. 12 to 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, actually 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. One time counterclockwise, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 12. And then just rest in the center of your clock. Okay, from here, we're going to roll onto our side and come up Okay, so we're gonna come up into a high kneeling position. And if you're bare armed, you might want to use your towel again. But you're gonna come close enough to the wall that the elbow can touch the wall and you can get it all the way around. So your closeness to the wall is going to be dictated by your shoulder mobility. So we're just with the elbow drawing a circle on that wall. Okay, and then we're going to go the other direction. The next time I take the shoulder back, I'm going to reach the other arm forward and come into a bit of a twist. Okay, then the elbow is going to come around and I'm going to come into a twist this direction. And then that elbow and the arm are going to switch positions and I'm going to twist. Now this time I'm going to step the outside leg forward. So I'm in a bit of a lunge here, okay? And I'm going to still play with that twist. The hand reaches back, the elbow reaches forward. Then the arm reaches forward, the elbow reaches back. Let me bring that hand right onto the wall. Then elbow reaches forward, arm reaches back. Just arcing the elbow and the arm between these two. And then I'm going to release that and flip around. Come into elbow circles on that other side. Think about getting as much contact of skin with that wall as I can. And I'm going to change directions. I'm going to start to play with that twist now. So as that elbow reaches back, I'm going to reach the arm forward. And then as the elbow comes around, I'm going to reach that arm back. And then change the direction of that elbow. One more time. And I'm going to step that outside leg or leg furthest from the wall to the floor. And again, play with a couple twists. With the elbow going one direction. And then with the elbow going the other direction to make those circles. Good. Okay, we're going to let that go. We're going to stay in a high kneeling position. And I'm going to hope that my closet door will work here. So in that high kneeling position, my hands are just at shoulder height and I'm up on top of those knees. Now what I'm going to play with is imagining that the hands are on a garage door and that I'm not only trying to open that garage door by pushing forward, but I'm also directing it upward like those old garage doors. And as I do, my hips just relax and they go back in space towards my heels. Then I'm going to press in through my shins and come back up. So I'm flexing at both my hip and at my knee as I send myself back in space by way of acting on that wall or door by pushing it away and up. The next time you push it away and up, you're going to take that other hand and reach underneath. You could just come onto the opposite knee. So we're in a bit of a thread the needle here. And then I'm going to push through the legs to come up. I'm going to send myself back. And again, twist here. Bringing that hand to the outside of that opposite knee, reaching and pushing up onto the wall. That other hand. Good. And then we're going to come up. Now we're going to play with, instead of hand on the wall and pushing the hips back, we're going to keep the hips here and just play with flexing the knee so it looks like this. I lean back in space and then I push my shins into the floor and come back up. And I'll feel quite a bit of work for the front of the quads. So now there's a couple of different ways you could work with this. One way would be using a yoga strap. And the way that you might use that yoga strap is fold it a couple times in the hands, thinking about pulling the hands out from one another as I go back and I come back up. So as I hinge back, the arms lift, I pull out, and then I come back up. So I might work with it this way. Okay, the next time you're up, what I'm going to get you to do is keep your knees where they are, but bring your feet closer in, and you might take the knees out a little bit. So we're in a bit more external rotation. So this is going to load the front of the thigh stuff a little bit differently. So from here, as I go back and the arms lift up, I'm going to feel different fibers firing, really trying to have no crease at the front of the hip, pressing the shins into the ground. I rise back up. And I rise back up. Now, if you don't feel like your glutes are engaging much as you are doing this, I'm going to invite you to place a band around your ankles. Now, I don't want you to just engage your glutes, because if you just consciously engage your glutes, the problem is that then when you come into, then you're just training yourself to have to do that. And I don't know about you, but I have enough stuff in my life I have to manage. I don't need to micromanage my movement. I want to input some stimulus that has my body respond the way it ought to. And if I'm eccentrically loading the front of my quads with this, then my hamstrings and my glutes better be shortening. And if they're not, I want to start to train them to do that. Okay? So as I come back, I'm going to think about pressing my heels out into the strap, and I should start to feel some stuff engage back here. I might also start to think about trying to lift my feet as I come back off the ground, which again will start to engage stuff back here, okay? And then I push into the ground to come up. So I'm going to think about pushing my heels out and trying to lift my feet off the ground as I come back. And you'll feel different stuff activate just with that intention of doing those things, okay? And that interaction with the environment will serve you longer term better than thinking about engaging the muscle. Because if you just think about engaging the muscle, it will only engage to the degree and in the points that your brain is hooked up to. Okay, it'll only form cross bridges in those areas. And I want it to form cross bridges based on the interaction with the environment. So although it might seem like, well, you're still consciously trying to do something, but the response of what's happening is going to be different. And if you don't believe me, come back up and engage your glutes and hamstrings without thinking about how you're interacting with the environment. What's the quality of that like compared to just thinking about interacting in that way with the environment by way of pushing the heels out and imagining trying to lift the feet off the ground as you lower back, okay? And there's a difference. There's a different quality between those two. Okay, another option, if you are noticing that there's less kind of neural drive or connectivity to the glutes and hamstrings with this movement that we're doing here, is to utilize a block between the inside edges of the heels. And then what you're going to do is gently press into the block, try to squeeze the block with the heels, as you also start to think about trying to lift the feet away from the ground. So then as you come back, you're squeezing the block, trying to lift the feet off the ground, and you might find that gives you a little bit more neural drive to your hamstrings and the toning of your glutes. Okay, so it's a pressing into the block and trying to lift the feet off the ground as you go back, and then pressing the tops of the legs into the floor to come back up. So if you notice that all of the sensation is kind of in the front of the thighs and the back of you is sort of dormant or asleep, try the block squeeze or the band press out. Okay, one other option to play with in this high kneeling lean back movement, and that is using the looped band. And so you're going to come up holding the loop band, and as you lean back, you're going to pull with that left elbow, reaching that right arm forward, and then come on back. So you're not going to think about doing anything with the legs, but with this pull and reach back, does that have your glutes and hamstrings engage more responsively to this movement organically, or do one of the other options that I demonstrated? Okay, so you can play with any and all of these variations. Have fun. Some restoration for what we just did. So one is going to be a restorative camel. So you're going to need a bolster, okay, and the wall. Bolster, wall, and a block. Okay, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so you're back here with a bolster and a block. So you're going to come and sit on the bolster. Now, if the degree to which you can get hip flexion is less than this, then you're going to need to prop stuff up underneath your bum. So it might be that you need a folded blanket or another block under there so that your knees are comfortable. So we're on our shins, we're on our knees, then we're going to take the block and it's going to come back between our back. Now I want to make sure that I'm forward enough that when I place this between my shoulder blades, just kind of near the bottom third of my shoulder blades is where the top edge of that block is going to be. And I want it vertical so that it's not going across this way, but the length of my spine. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the head come back and it'll rest on the door. So I've got something underneath my sitting bones, okay? I've got something at the bottom third of the breastbone, but at the spine. And then I've got the crown of the head resting on the door. And I want to make sure that where the head's kind of resting on the door is such that I don't feel a loss of kind of flow or energy through the neck or the throat. So when I first put on it was like my head was kind of falling off. So I want to position myself that, and it might mean that you've got to move your pelvis forward a little bit or back a little bit, but that there's this kind of from the Adam's apple or the hyoid bone here down to the pubic bone, this arc that if you were to imagine yourself as a body of water flowing, that the flow of water would be this direction. An alternative to this block could be that I set up like this. I use the edge of a couch for just below my shoulder blades and then a block underneath my skull. Okay, that would be another way you could set this up. You might imagine the breath as you exhale, exhaling down to the pubic bone, and then inhaling up the back of the spine into the back of the skull, and exhaling down the front of the body. You might also reverse that, so you might have a sense of inhaling from the pelvis up to the throat, and exhaling down the back body. But I invite you to try both of those and settle into the one that feels most organic for you for the next 5 breaths. Okay, then I'm going to bring the chin towards the collarbone or the collarbones. And then I'm going to bring that mid back and release the block. Now we're going to set up using that block and bolster again for a bit of a twist. So we've got our bolster, we've got our block. I'm going to set the block up underneath that end of the bolster. I might also need, depending on the height of my bolster, I might need something like a blanket or something to raise my hip up if this distance from the bolster to the floor is like just too much for the area on the outside of my hip. Okay. And then I'm going to rotate and lower myself down. And I'm going to start with my gaze. I'm going to lose my mic here. I'm going to start with my gaze in the direction that my knees are. And then my hands can just be on either side of that support, or they could weave underneath it as well. After a few breaths, if I feel like I've got the space, I could take my head and look in the opposite direction to my knees. But I've got to have enough mobility through my T-spine to be able to access this cervical rotation. So if when you come here, you feel tension in the jaw or the neck increase, just stay here. You might even take your hands into this this orientation. Your intention with your attention might be that you feel the back body move as you inhale, so you feel the ribs spread and widen and broaden. And as you exhale, you feel how the spine moves closer to the breastbone and the breastbone moves closer to the spine. So you feel the front and back of the body broadening, thickening, and then narrowing as you exhale. One more breath here. And then we're going to set up with that twist in the other direction. We're going to come up, flip the legs around. Again, line up that bolster right next to the hip. Lower down onto it. Start with your gaze in the direction that your knees are. And if you feel like your weight is kind of falling to the one side, like the back shoulder side, the arm on the opposite side of where the knees are facing, know that a rolled towel or blanket can be helpful. I'm just going to take this. And if I place this kind of where my rib cage and my arm are, that it can help rotate me towards that front arm side. Okay. So it can help support the twist. So if you feel like you're kind of falling onto that back arm, I want you to get some prop underneath that rib cage, okay, that then brings you into that twist in the direction of your knees. And then you can take your gaze, once you've had it in that direction for a bit, you can take it in the other direction if you've got the mobility through the T-spine and the cervical spine today to do that. And know that if you need more height, you can bring the block. It's got 3 sides. So play with where it cultivates some like flow and connection for you in your body today. Again, your attention might be on the breath, widening, thickening between the breastbone and the spine, and then narrowing or softening between those 2 places. Okay, one more breath here. Okay, then you press yourself up. And the final posture for our practice today is going to be constructive rest. So what that is going to have us do is to come onto our back. You can use your block. We've got our towel. So I'm just going to make a little taco so that the block's a little bit softer. And then I'm going to place that between my thighs. So the block is between my thighs, and then I'm going to walk my feet out to the edge of my mat, nurturing some internal rotation. So depending on your hips, the block may need to be wider or narrower with that wrapped around it. I've got it down closest to the pubic bone, but some of you might find that it's better for you to have that at toward the knee or the distal end of the femur. So Wherever it allows there to feel like there's space across the back of the pelvis in terms of placement of that block and placement of your feet. So some of you might find that your feet need to be further from your mat to generate the support and the force into the pelvis that has the pelvis feel like it's able to broaden and be heavy on the mat. And some of you might find that your feet need to be closer in towards your bottom. So give yourself a chance here to kind of walk the feet around, walk the block around, and just like at the eye doctor, just keep asking yourself, is this better or is this better? Is this better or is this better? Because the question always is what does your system need today in terms of input to yield and receive the support of the ground. Okay, and that's gonna change up. So there isn't a this is how you set up this pose. It's much more an inquiry on your part, moment to moment and day to day. And I'm continually asking myself, does this allow me to feel more of me? Can I feel my foot and my knee and my hip more clearly? And when I do, that's where I'm going to hang out for 5 more breaths. Then from here, I'm going to transition to my final posture of my practice today, which is Shavasana. Because we've got the bolster, I always think it's really lovely to incorporate it, just place it underneath the thighs. You might want to be close enough that you can feel the soles of your feet on the wall. That might be a nice feedback up into the system. And if you have the luxury of resting here for 10 minutes, I invite you to do that. Or if maybe you can only be here 2 minutes, that's great too. Thank you for practicing with me today and inquiring. Namaste.